Chapter 18. 3 Test Questions. Go Jing went toward where the snake noise came from. After dozens of steps under the bright moonlight, he saw millions of green snakes crawling together as a flock. There were more than 10 men wearing white clothes carrying long poles herding the snakes. Go Jing gulped. He was greatly surprised. What are these people with so many snakes doing here? Could it be that Western poison has arrived? Without regard to his own safety, he came nearer, sneaked behind trees and followed them heading north. Luckily, the men who herd the snakes did not have a high level of martial arts, otherwise he would be detected. A deaf and mute servant of Huang Yaoshi was seen in front of the herd, showing the way. They walked through winding path for several lists through the forest and crossing a small hill before finally arrived at a big stretch of grass meadow. Toward the north of the meadow was a bamboo forest. As soon as they were all on this meadow, the men in whites blew their whistles and the snakes stopped. They all stayed on the ground with their heads raised high in the air. Go Jing knew there must be something in the bamboo grove. He wanted to take a look, but he did not dare to reveal his presence by walking across the meadow. So he stealthily walked to the east and then circled back north, keeping his ears open at all times. But the forest was quiet. Finally he arrived and immediately entered the thick green bamboo grove. Inside the grove there was a small pavilion built from bamboo. Under the bright moonlight, Go Jing could see across the pavilion opening was written these 3 characters, Old Jada Green Pavilion. While on either side hung 2 couplets, under the shadow of peach blossom divine sword flew, and with the jade-colored ocean tide jade flute arose. Several bamboo chairs were placed inside the pavilion. The chairs looked rustic and old. Under the bright moonlight the bamboo looked longer green but smooth and shiny yellow. The pavilion was built in between 2 big pine trees. Their trunks and branches spread out looked like dragons lurking in the dark. The trees were several hundred years old. The dark green bamboo surrounding the bamboo pavilion, the trees, all gave a feeling of serenity and beauty. Go Jing looked back and saw the snakes were still staying in row after row on the meadow. Only now did he realize that the snakes were not only green snakes, but other types of snakes as well. There were rattlesnakes, golden-scaled snakes, black snakes, all kinds of venomous snakes. The snakes kept moving their heads, which made the meadow rippled like ocean waves. The snakes' tongues flicked in and out their mouths, looked like tiny flames dancing chaotically. The snakes' shepherds divided the flock to open up a pathway right in the middle. Dozens of females dressed in white walking by carrying red lanterns. Several zhangs behind the 2 men were walking slowly. The first was wearing a white satin long gown, embroidered by gold threads, with a folding fan in his hand. It was none other than Aoyang arriving at the bamboo grove. He said in a loud and clear voice, "Mr. Aoyang from the western region pays a visit to the Peach Blossom Island, Master Huang." It really is western poison, Go Jing thought. No wonder all these pomp and fanfares. He turned his eyes to the man beside Aoyang. He was big and tall, also wearing white clothes. But because the light was coming from behind him, Go Jing could not see his face clearly. Those 2 people stood there waiting. Out from the bamboo grove came out 2 people. Go Jing's heart leaped to his throat. He almost cried out in alarm. They were none other than Huang Yaoshi holding Huang Rong's hand to welcome the guests. Aoyang Feng rushed forward and raised his hands to salute. Huang Yaoshi reciprocated by cupping his fists. Aoyang actually knelt down where he was, kowtowed 4 times and said, "Son-in-law kowtowed to the honorable father-in-law. Wishes honorable father-in-law's peace and prosperity." "Enough," Huang Yaoshi said, extending his hand to raise him up. Go Jing could hear clearly what these 2 people were saying. His heart was tumultuous. He didn't know what to do. Aoyang had anticipated that Huang Yaoshi would certainly test his martial art, so he had been prepared early on. Even when kowtowing he was fully alert. But suddenly he felt his own right hand move toward his left hand and pushed him upward. He stumbled and almost fell down face to the ground. Only by exerting his energy was he finally able to stay standing. but his body was still staggering. "Ayo!" he cried out. Ao Feng immediately stretched the staff in his hand and tapped gently on his nephew's back. Ao took advantage of this force and steadied himself. Ao Feng smiled. "Good," he said. "Yao Zhong, was that your way of greeting your son-in-law in your first meeting, by making him do a somersault?" Huang Yaoshi sneered. "Once he helped others bullying my blind disciple. Other time he scared her with his snakes. I want to see what ability he possesses." Ao Feng laughed. "That was children's small misunderstanding, Yao Zhong, please don't mind him. This child of mine, is he worthy enough to be your precious daughter's match?" He turned toward Huang Rong to check her out. Clucking his tongue in admiration, he continued, "Elder brother Huang, by having this beautiful young lady, your life is lacking nothing." He groped his pocket and produced a small embroidered box. He opened the box and showed a pigeon-sized sphere. The sphere shone brightly in the dark, dazzling to the eyes. He turned to Huang Rong and smiled. "This is the rhinoceros dragon pill. Western region's rare animal. I further refined it with some other medicinal substances. When you wear it, you won't be affected by hundreds of types of poison. It is one of its kinds in the whole wide world. Later on you will become my nephew's wife. You won't be afraid of your uncle's venomous snakes and insects. This dragon pill's usefulness is not small, but it cannot be regarded as the most precious treasure in the world. Your father has traversed the world, what kind of treasure he has not seen? This is only a countryman from a remote area's first meeting's gift. I am afraid he would laugh at it." Then he presented 2 boxes to Huang Rong. Ao Feng was an expert in using poison. By giving this precious poison repellent as a dowry, he showed his sincerity and was hoping to win Huang Yaoshi's heart. Go Jing saw everything. "Ronger has always been good to me. She won't change her mind. Surely she doesn't want first meeting gift of yours," he thought. But unexpectedly he heard Huang Rong said with a smile, "Many thanks to you," and extended her hand to receive it. As soon as Ao saw Huang Rong's snowy white skin and face as pretty as a flower, his soul had already been sold. Now that she was smiling at him, his whole body melted. He thought, since her father had given her hand in marriage to me, naturally her attitude toward me is not the same as it was before. He felt smug. But suddenly some metal flashed toward him. "Not good!" he cried, and immediately bent his body backward using iron bridge stance. "What are you doing?" Huang Yaoshi scolded his daughter. His left sleeve flicked and struck down the steel needle shot from Huang Rong's hand, while with the back of his right hand he pushed her shoulder back. "Wah!" Huang Rong bawled. "Father, you'd better kill me," she cried. "I'd rather die than marrying this bad thing." Ao Feng thrust the dragon pill into Huang Rong's hand while his other hand gently fended off Huang Yaoshi's palm. "Your daughter is just testing my nephew's martial art. Why are you so serious?" Because he was striking his own daughter, naturally Huang Yaoshi's palm did not carry a lot of strength. Ao Feng's hand also did not carry a lot of force. Ao had straightened his body. He felt pain in his left chest, so he knew he was being hit by 1 or 2 needles. However, he was proud and did not want anybody else to know, so he kept a straight face. Only he was embarrassed. She did not want to marry me after all, he thought. Ao Feng smiled. Yao Zhong, since our last meeting at the Mount Hua, we haven't seen each other for more than 20 years. Now that you have accepted my nephew's proposal, whenever you have a business for me to do, your brother will not dare to refuse. Who dares to provoke you, old poison? Huang Yaoshi replied. You have stayed in the western region for 20 years, what new fierce martial arts have you mastered? Come, let me see. As soon as Huang Rong heard her father mentioned new martial arts, her interest was piqued. She wiped her tears away and leaned to his father. Her eyes looked closely to Ao Feng. She saw a curving black staff in his hand. Looked like it was made of steel. The head of the staff resembled a man's face, with its mouth open showing 2 rows of sharp teeth. The face looked ugly and fearsome. What was more amazing was there were a couple of silver-scaled snakes slithering up and down along the staff. Ouyang Feng smiled. "I was inferior to you then, and now that I have wasted more than 20 years, I certainly won't be your match," he said. "We become in-laws now. I am thinking of staying in the Peach Blossom Island for a few days and asking your advice." When Ouyang Feng sent an envoy to propose for his nephew Huang Yao, she thought that Ouyang Feng was one of only a handful of people whose martial art could be compared to his own. Ouyang Feng was also an educated man, so must be his nephew. He knew his own daughter was stubborn and strong-willed. If she married just anybody, he was afraid she would bully her husband. Besides, he loathed that Go kid whom his daughter liked. Ouyang Feng was not only highly educated, but was highly skilled in martial arts as well. Not too many young men would hold a candle against him. That was the reason he accepted their proposal. But now he listened to Ouyang Feng's sweet mouth, he could not help but feel suspicious. He knew Ouyang Feng was crafty and sly. Ouyang Feng would not easily admit defeat to others in terms of martial arts. His toad stance had been neutralized by Wang Chongyang's solitary yang finger. Could it be that he had recovered completely? So Huang Yao she took out his jade flute and said, "Honored guests come from afar. Little brother is going to play a tune to entertain you. Please sit down and leisurely listen to this song." Ouyang Feng knew Huang Yaoshi was going to play the jade-colored tidal wave song to test his internal strength. So he showed a faint smile and waved his left hand. Immediately the 32 white-dressed lantern carrier maidens stepped forward and kneeled before them. Ouyang Feng smiled and said, "Your brother has acquired these 32 maidens from various regions in the West. Please accept them as my gift to an old friend. They are trained in singing and dancing. Yet they came from uncultured places. Of course they can't be compared to Jiangnan's beautiful maidens. Your brother does not enjoy this kind of gift very much," Huang Yaoshi replied. "Since my wife passed away, I regard the world's beautiful women as dung. I do not dare to accept Brother Feng's generous gift. What's the harm in some entertainment to pass the time away?" Ouyang Feng laughed. Huang Rong noticed that these women's skin was fair, lighter in color. Their statues were tall, some had blonde hair and blue eyes. Their noses were high and their eyes deep. Totally different from the women from the Central Plains. But they were all beautiful, carrying a seductive look that would attract casual onlookers. Ouyang Feng clapped his hands 3 times, and 8 women took out various musical instruments. They started playing the instruments while the other 24 women started dancing to their tune. The musical instruments as well as the tune were different from the ones commonly played in the Central Plains. They sounded weird in Huang Rong's ears. She saw the front row women bent down, turning to the left and then back to the right. Their bodies were very supple. The next rows did the same, row after row dancing in succession, resembled a large snake. After a while each woman extended both their hands apart. From the tip of their left hand to the tip of their right hand, their bodies swayed following the tune, reminding her of snakes slithering on the ground. Huang Rong remembered Ouyang Feng's spirit snake fist. So she cast a glance toward him, only to see that Ouyang Feng was closely staring at her. She hated him to the guts and wished that her father would not intercept her needles. She would find another way of taking his life, that even if her father would force her to marry, the person was already dead. It was called the remove firewood from and earth tactic. Having this thought she was happy and a smile broke on her face. Ouyang Feng saw her sudden smile, and thought that she was smiling at him. He was elated that he momentarily forgot the pain in his chest. By now the dance movements of the women were getting more intense. Their bodies moved erotically, their hands caressed their own buttocks, moving upward to their breasts, and unfastening their dress they showed their upper bodies and posed in various postures. The men who shepherd the snakes of early on closed their eyes tight. They did not dare to look, even when their minds were disturbed. Wang Yaoshi simply smiled and put the flute on his lips. He started playing a tune. The women's bodies suddenly shook. Their dance movements were chaotic. A few bars later, both their music and their dance were following the flute's sound. Ouyang Feng knew something was amiss. He clapped his hands and a maiden stepped forward carrying an iron zeng. Ouyang started to feel his heart beating faster. The 8 women playing the musical instruments have early on lost their control and totally following the flute's tune. The men in charge of the snakes jumped up and down like crazy among the snakes. Ouyang Feng played a few notes on his zither, producing a metallic sound like an iron horse charging toward the enemy. In contrast with the soft murmuring sound of the flute, Wang Yaoshi smiled and said, "Come, come. Let us play a duet." As soon as the flute left his lips, everybody was relieved from their hysterical condition. "Everybody stop your ears. Island Master Huang and I will play some music," Ouyang Feng shouted. The people who came with him knew the song would not be a small matter. Immediately they took anything, including ripping their own clothes, that could be used to cover their ears. Layer after layer they put cotton and pieces of clothes over their ears. Yet they were still afraid the sound would penetrate that barrier. Ouyang also took some cotton balls to stop his ears. "My father plays his flute for your listening enjoyment. That was a big honor to you. Yet all of you cover your ears. That is so rude. You come to the Peach Blossom Island as guests, yet you dare to insult the host." Wang Rong mocked. "Don't talk about rudeness here." Wang Yaoshi scolded her. "They who do not dare to listen to my flute actually have more sense. They had learned their lessons. Haha, your uncle's iron zither's skill is considered best in the world. And you dare to listen to him? Do you want to test yourself?" Then he took a silk handkerchief from his pocket, tore it in halves and told Huang Rong to cover up her ears with them. Gojing was curious about the world's best iron zither. He wanted to hear Ouyang Feng's fierce method, so he came even closer a few more steps. Wang Yaoshi turned to Ouyang Feng, "Your snakes cannot cover up their ears." Then he turned his head toward his own deaf and mute servant. He made some gesture and the servant nodded his head. The servant then signaled the snake's shepherds to go away by waving his hand. These men had been waiting for an opportunity to get out of that place. As soon as Ouyang Feng nodded his head in approval, they hurriedly drove the snakes away, with the deaf and mute servant showing the way. Ouyang Feng said, "Your brother's martial art is not good enough. I must ask Yao Zhang to reduce your strength by 30%. He sat cross-legged on a big rock with the zither on his lap and immediately used his right fingers to pluck some strings. The original Dichenzhen produced sad and shrill sound. This Western region iron zither produced an even more intensely sorrowful noise. Gojing did not understand music, but the zither sound had affected his feeling. The louder the zither sound, the harder his heartbeat. The quicker the zither sound, the quicker his breath had become. He felt his heart was thumping really bad, almost jumping out of his throat. It was really an uneasy feeling. After listening some more time he felt his heartbeat intensified. And he struggled hard to keep his consciousness. If this zither is getting harder and harder, how could I not getting killed by its sound? He thought. And immediately retreated a few steps back and circulated his ki according to the Quan Sense method. After a while he managed to calm his heart and the zither sound did not adversely affect him too much. The zither sound was getting more intense, and in Gojing's mind it resembled the metallic armor of a cavalry charging full steam ahead. A thin sound of jade flute appeared riding smoothly in the midst of the clamoring sound of the zither. Gojing was trembling. His face was red-hot and he was sweating profusely. Quickly he circulated his internal energy trying to calm himself. Although the zither was loud, it was not able to drown the flute. Two distinct sounds intermingled, creating an eerie melody. The iron zither screamed like an ape of the Wuxia Gorge or a ghost cry in the dead of the night, while the flute sang like a phoenix from the Kunlun Mountains or a soft murmur of a woman inside her chamber. One resembled a heartrending cry of a mournful soul. while the other carried a feeling of one leisurely wander through the wilderness. One high, the other low. One rushing forward, the other leisurely retreating. No one overpowered the other. Initially Huang Rong watched these two play music with a smile on her face. But afterwards she saw their expressions were getting serious. Her father stood up and started to walk around while blowing his flute. His steps were actually following the 8 diagram. She knew this was the footwork her father followed when he was cultivating his internal energy, showing her how fierce the battle was for her father that he was forced to use up all his strength. Turning toward Ouyang Feng, she did not see anything better. Thick steam was coming out from the top of his head. His sleeves were fluttering following his hands' movement plucking the strings, creating gusts of wind blowing everywhere. His face looked seriously focused on his zither playing. Obviously he did not dare to act carelessly. In the bamboo grove, Gojing listened to the music attentively. He was pondering in his heart what had these two instruments, the iron zither and the jade flute, had to do with martial arts? They sounded so evil to him. How could the sound affect other people's heart and mind? At first he was too busy circulating his qi and calming his heart and mind, but gradually he was able to control himself and was able to follow the movements of flute and zither sounds. A little while later he started to realize that those two sounds were actually battling each other. When one sound was on the offensive, the other took a defensive position. Sometimes one was attacking the other furiously, while the other blocking the attack while waiting for a good opportunity to counterattack. Really, it was no different than a battle between two martial arts masters. After pondering some more time, suddenly it dawned on him, "Thought's right. The island master Huang is having an internal energy match against Ouyang Feng." Because he wanted to understand better, he closed his eyes but opened wide his ears with full attention. He began to hear the two sounds were alternately gaining victory or suffering defeat. Being music illiterate, the sound of music would not affect his spirit. But he did feel an openness in his heart, like he was looking at something bright. His mind wandered back to when Zubatong taught him the 72 stance vacant fist, which stemmed from the words empty and clear. With his mind open wide and clear, he can see every detail in the internal energy fight between Huang Yaoshi and Ouyang Feng clearly. True, his internal energy was still inferior compared to those two experts, but he had improved greatly without even realizing it. Besides, as a spectator he could see better than those two who were involved in the battle. He often wondered why Zubatong could not resist the flute sound, while with an inferior strength he could. He did not know that Zubatong carried a heavy guilt inside his heart because of what he did in the past. So it was not purely because of one's internal energy strength one could withstand the flute sound. By now Gojing heard Ouyang Feng's zither was crushing Huang Yaoshi's flute with a force as powerful as a thunderbolt. The flute evaded to the east and dodged to the west, and as soon as there was a gap in the zither sound, the flute would counterattack immediately. After a while the zither gradually slowed down, while the flute was getting more intense. Suddenly Gojing remembered the theory behind the vacant fist which he memorized. It said, "Hard must not last long, soft must not defend long." He thought, not too long the zither will launch a counterattack. And sure enough, when the flute was slacking a little bit, abruptly a clank sound was heard, the iron zither again assuming the offensive position. Gojing had memorized the theory well, but his perception was still low. Zubatong did not explain the meaning of the words he passed on to Gojing. Perhaps his overall comprehension was only about 10%. Now listening to the battle and music between Huang Yaoshi and Ouyang Feng, he started to understand who was doing what. It agreed with the theory he had memorized so well. Secretly he was delighted. The 9-yin manual contained some very advanced theories of martial arts. If it were left to him to dissect the theory even with somebody's assistance, he would probably spend more than a year just to understand what it said. But now listening to two sounds collided, he kept comparing the battle to the theory. However, he saw some discrepancies between the theory and the real battle situation. but he attributed those discrepancies to his own shallow comprehension. For example, there were several occasions where Huang Yaoshi was obviously gaining an upper hand. As long as he kept the flute sound steady, Ouyang Feng would not be able to withstand. But Ouyang Feng also missed several opportunities to be exploited to his advantage. Go Jing initially thought they were being modest and backed off, but as he listened more, it didn't appear to be the case. His intelligence might be low, but after those two people repeatedly made the similar mistakes, he began to realize that the flute and zither had a lot of holes in their defense. After listening for a little bit more, a thought came into his mind. Compared to the theory of vacant fist, their offense and defense have flaws and deficiencies. Could it be that the theory passed on by Brother Zhu is better than both Island Master Huang's and Western Poison's martial arts? But then he changed his mind. Nah. It couldn't be. If Brother Zhu's martial art is really better than Island Master Huang's, how could those two fight countless battles for 15 years and he is still stranded inside that cave? He racked his brain for a long time without any conclusion when he heard the flute sound was climbing higher and higher until if he went higher still, Ouyang Feng's defeat would be decided. But the flute was not able to climb any higher. It had reached the peak. Go Jing stifled his laugh. I was really dumb. There is a limit to what one can do. Among the desires of the heart, 9 out of 10 cannot be achieved. I know that if my fist could generate a 10,000 catties force, I will be able to crush my opponent to dust. But how can my fist develop those 10,000 catties of force? Seventh Master often said, looking at others carry a burden on a pole easily does not mean we can do the same without breaking our back. If merely carrying a burden follows this principle, how much more does martial art? The sound of music was increasingly fiercer. And it sounded like those two were engaged in a hand-to-hand combat, or fighting in a very close distance using naked blades. Victory or defeat would be decided very soon. Go Jing was worried for Huang Yaoshi when suddenly he heard a long and loud whistle coming from the direction of the sea. Both Huang Yaoshi and Ouyang Feng were startled. The flute and the zither were slowing down. The whistle came nearer and nearer. It sounded like someone was sailing on a boat coming toward the island. Ouyang Feng moved his hand and stroked 2 metallic notes. Clank, clank. The distant whistle went higher to overpower the zither. Not too long afterwards, Huang Yaoshi's flute joined in. Sometimes the flute was fighting the long whistle. Sometimes it entangled the zither in a close fight. The distinct sounds were fighting each other. Go Jing had played Fur People combat with Zhu Batong before, so he did not have any problem dividing his mind to distinguish different sounds. He knew a senior with a high level of martial art had arrived. By then the person uttering the long whistle had arrived at the forest. The whistle turned high and low. Sometimes sounded like a dragon's cry or a lion's roar. Sometimes resembled a wolf's howl or an owl's cry. But it also sounded like a strong wind blowing through the forest, which suddenly turned into a gentle rain showering the flowers. It was constantly changing. The flute sound was clear and bright, the zither sound was intensely mournful, yet the combination of the three made a mysteriously wonderful sound. Did not sound bad at all. 3 different sounds entangled each other in a close fight. Go Jing was amazed and could not help exclaiming, "Wonderful!" But once he closed his mouth he realized he had made a mistake. He scurried away, but it was too late. A green shadow flashed by and Huang Yaoshi was standing in front of him. The 3 sounds were not heard anymore. Huang Yaoshi lowered his head and said, "Good boy, come with me." Go Jing did not have any choice, but stood up and meekly greeted, "Island Master Huang." With the hair on his back raised up he followed Huang Yaoshi walking toward the bamboo pavilion. Huang Rong still had her ears covered with silk, so she did not hear Go Jing's exclamation. Now suddenly Go Jing appeared. She was pleasantly surprised. "Brother Jing, you have finally come," she called out. She was joyous, yet sad at the same time. Before she could finish, tears had already flowed down her cheeks. She rushed forward and threw herself into Go Jing's bosom. Go Jing opened his arms and embraced her tightly. Since Go Jing appeared, Aoyanke had been annoyed. Now he saw how intimate Wang Rong with Go Jing. His heart was burning hot with hatred. With a gust of wind his fist flew toward Go Jing's face. "Stinky kid! You are also here!" he shouted. He thought his martial arts skill was higher than Go Jing's. Furthermore, his attack could be considered a sneak attack. Go Jing was unprepared, so he thought he might break Go Jing's nose, thus lashing out his hatred. But not in his wildest imagination that Go Jing now was not the same as Go Jing then, when they fought each other at the Boying Ancestral Hall. Go Jing saw a fist coming by, he leaned to the side to evade, then his left hand launched wild geese rising from the shore while his right hand launched the proud dragon repents. Both from the 18 dragon subduing palms. The 18 dragon subduing palms were unparalleled in the world. One move was very difficult to withstand, much less two stances at the same time. How could Aoyanke face them? Huang Yaoshi and Aoyang Feng were actually standing close-by. But they did not anticipate Go Jing's counterattack. Both were startled yet were unable to do anything. Aoyanke felt his opponent's left hand was threatening his right side. He knew these 18 dragon subduing palms were very fierce. He could evade but could not parry. Quickly he leaned his body to the left exactly at the same time Go Jing's right hand's proud dragon repents came by. Crack! His upper torso was squarely hit, and one of his ribs was broken. Actually he was aware of the fierceness of the opponent's attack. When Go Jing's hand arrived he had already focused his energy on his chest to protect his heart and lungs against the incoming force. Furthermore, as soon as he was hit he tried to lessen the injury by trying to jump up. But the incredible force from Go Jing's hand had added to his own energy and sent him flying toward the bamboo pavilion's roof. He managed to land standing up albeit staggering badly, then slowly slid down. He was awfully embarrassed and his chest was hurt badly. Slowly he walked back,